Hello everyone, and welcome back to another R video tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to continue our discussion of plotting in R by beginning to sort of customize and change the default plots. And I want to start by talking about using color. And I think as we go through these sort of alterations to default plots, you're really going to see why GGPLOT2 and the grammar of graphics starts to become far less cumbersome to use. And so I want to break up talking about color into two different parts. One is just using sort of the default color palettes and the default decisions that R makes for the colors. And then in the next video, I want to talk about how we can use the custom color palettes that are available both within R and within some other packages such as Color Brewer. And so let's begin our discussion here with default colors. Now I should specify when I say default colors, I don't just mean black, which is what we've seen happen so far. I mean if we want to incorporate actual color into our graphics. So as always, I want to start with base R. And so let's begin our discussion by simply just changing the color from black to, let's say, red, for example. So we're going to take our scatter plot from before. So I'm just going to copy and paste here to save us a little bit of typing. Now for the base R, all you do is you do a third parameter called col, C-O-L, and then you type in the name of the color that you want. So in this case, we're going to choose red, and then you run that. And if we run that here, you'll see it appear over here. So now what we've done is we've created a red set of points instead of the default black. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So let's do single color. So let's implement the same thing now with GGPLOT2. And again, I'm going to copy our previous ggplot, so that way we save ourselves a little bit of typing here. So what we're going to do, and if for some reason you don't have these lines of code, I encourage you to pause the video and just take a second to retype them out. So this is an important distinction with ggplot. The difference between what goes inside of the aesthetics and what goes outside of the aesthetics. And this will make a lot more sense when we talk about colors based on variables. But for right now, we're going to make sure that when we do this, we put the color parameter outside of the aesthetics function, but inside of the geometry point function. So just make sure that you have this parentheses here before you put the comma color. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to say red. And if we run this, and then we run that, you'll see that we have generated the same thing with the red points. So that's all well and good. We've got a single color. But let's just assume now that instead we want to color based on a variable. Right, let's just assume, right, we're using the iris data set, that we're curious about how this scatter plot of sepal width versus sepal length varies based on species. Right, so again, I'm going to copy our code here. And so instead of specifying a string the color red, we're simply going to insert the name of the variable that we want the colors to pull from. In this case, species. So now if we run this and we run that, you'll see here that one of them is still black. That's because this is the default color choice. You'll see that we've colored them based on the species. So we have black, red, and green. Now, this particular graphic here isn't very helpful, and one of the reasons that it's not very helpful is because we have no idea what these colors mean. Now, I'm not going to show you how to add a legend in the custom into the regular plot right now. What I am going to do is I'm going to jump ahead and we're going to talk about color based on a variable in R, or in ggplot. So we're going to copy this again down here. And we're going to actually erase what we have here because we need to actually move this call. So when we did it based on a single color, that's what we would call a static color, right? We put it outside of this aesthetic. But because we want the color to be driven by a piece of the data, we actually have to move that inside of this aesthetic, because now we're actually mapping, right? Because this mapping with the aesthetic function is telling ggplot what parts of the variable to connect to what parts of the graph. And we said, we want sepal length to be connected to the x, we want sepal width to be connected to the y. Well, now we want the color to be connected to the species, right? So again, we want the color to be driven by the species. So it's inside of this aesthetic function. Versus up here, we just wanted it to be a static color red. We didn't want it to be driven by any of the data, so we didn't put it inside of this aesthetic. So if we run this, and then we run that, you'll see that what GGPLOT2 has done for us is not only have we changed the colors to something a little bit better than the black, green, and red, but we've also sort of included a default legend. Now, granted, it's not the most amazing legend in the world, but it is a legend. So sort of by default, ggplot is already starting to become a little bit more useful when it comes to using colors. The last thing that I want to do is to color based on a threshold. Right? So let's assume here that in our plot we have sepal width and sepal length, and we want to color the points based on a third variable. In this case, we used a factor called species. But let's assume that instead we wanted to threshold whether or not the petal length was a certain length or not. So I'm going to copy this here, just because it saves us a little bit of time. And instead of calling it species, what we want to do is we want to use an equality. So let's use the equality petal dot. Actually, you know what? Just because it'll be easier to visualize, let's do sepal dot length is less than 5. So what we would hope that this would do is that this would color those that have a sepal length less than 5 one color, and a sepal length greater than 5 another color. But if we run it, and we run that, you'll see that what it's actually done is it's actually excluded some entirely. And the reason for that is because the plot function expects colors to either be a string with a name such as red, or it expects it to be a factor variable such as species. So we can simply wrap this in the factor function that will turn this into a factor. And now if we do it, you'll see that we get 2 colors. And you'll see that everything less than 5 is one color, and everything greater than 5 is another. So let's just see how that would look in ggplot. What does color based on a threshold look like in ggplot? So we're going to copy the color based on a variable, because again, we're using a piece of the data to drive the color. So we want to make sure that this color is inside this aesthetic function call here, because again, color is being driven by a piece of data, versus up here, color was just a static value. So we're going to, in this case, we're going to draw the color based on sepal dot, help if I could spell, sepal dot length less than 5. So if we run this, and then we run this again, you will see that we have done the same thing. We've colored it, but in this case, we didn't have to specify a factor. ggplot is a lot more dynamic in that regard. It doesn't expect us to format our data ahead of time. And you'll see that just like before, it's colored the data with what are, in my opinion, slightly better default colors, and it gives us a built-in legend, which automatically makes this a little bit more useful. So I know this was a slightly longer video. I know there was a lot of parts to it. If you felt confused at any point, I encourage you to pause the video, go back, rewatch the parts you're confused about, and as always, please reach out. Thank you.